Okay, we are on. It's Tuesday, July 23rd, and this is our work session in Basalt Town Hall. And the first thing up today is tobacco tax ballot language discussion.
Great. Hello, good afternoon. Hi, I'm Karen Kenneman, Public Health Director, and I have Jody Radke from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, which is a national organization. And Jody and I are going to do a joint presentation today. But Jody, do you want to just give a little synopsis of your work, what the agency does, and then also the work you've been doing around tobacco?
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. It's good to be here today. My name is Jody Radke, as Karen mentioned. I'm the Regional Director with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Been doing this work for well over 15 years. I'm based here in Colorado, so I'm a Colorado resident. And our organization is based in D.C., but we work on tobacco control policy solely. That's the only issue we do work on, and we work on it locally, statewide, federally, and internationally, actually. So I've been doing a lot of work locally, assisting some of these tax discussions at the city and county level, particularly within the last 12 to 18 months. So there's been a lot of activity post passage of House Bill 1033, which I think many of you in the room are aware of, which we worked on at the state level to help provide some of our cities and counties with more tools in the tool chest to respond to what they're seeing in terms of the tobacco use rates across the state.
So what we're really looking for is direction around the ballot language today. So we'll have some questions for you at the very end to have some decision points on, but we'll lead you through a presentation to get you to that point.
Great, thank you. Carry on. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, thanks.
So, as I mentioned, we're looking for direction on three different items: the amount of tax on cigarettes, and then also the amount of percentage on other tobacco products. We're also looking at how, or if we should have an escalator on the tax itself. And then finally, the use of the revenue if the tax is passed in November. So we'll have some decision-making points as we go through the process with you today. So this, we'll just go through this very briefly and recognize that the BOCC is very knowledgeable about some of these issues, but we want to present it in context of really why a tobacco tax. And what we know is that smoking and relatable illnesses are the leading cause of death, preventable death in the U.S. So even though it felt like we made a lot of progress with tobacco and tobacco law and cessation over the years and have had a change in cultural norms around tobacco, tobacco still remains one of the leading causes of preventable death in the U.S. And so I think we just want to acknowledge that it's still an issue. It costs $170 billion a year in direct medical costs. In Colorado, the estimated state plus federal tax burden is $650 a household per year. That right now, tobacco tax in Colorado is 84 cents per pack, which is the 39th in the state. So it's one of the lowest in the country. And the national average is $1.78. So we really haven't kept up with the times necessarily in relation to even other states in the country. And we know that e-cigarettes are not currently taxed in the state of Colorado. So this is just showing tobacco tax rates across the country, and you can see there again that Colorado is one of the lowest, and that you can see also where other states have really, across the state, have increased that tax. Judy, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I think it's notable that Colorado remains one of the lowest in the nation, given the healthy status of our state overall. But I think Tabor has provided some restrictions and obstacles in having to pursue these tax increases at the ballot. The last time we were at the ballot was in 2016. In Pitkin County, amongst many of the other counties across this area of the state, were extraordinarily supportive of that tax request that was put before voters in 2016. So it's exciting to see movement in the space. It's the number one way to reduce use rates amongst our kids in terms of tobacco. And tobacco, as you probably know, vaping use, we lead the country in use across the nation. So tax is an extraordinarily important policy change.
And so, as Jody said, we know that as tax increases, use rates go down. And this is just a illustration of that, every 10% increase in price, there's a 3 to 5% decrease in adult prevalence and 6 to 7% in youth use. And I'll let you jump in if you have anything else to add there. Okay. And then this is just another graph, it really illustrating that same point. To look at youth use and prevalence versus cigarette pack price. So you can see the curves on both of those lines with the youth smoking prevalence in the red and the price pack adjusted for inflation in the green. And so as the tax prices go up, the youth use goes down. And so when we're talking about unit price increase, which is just another way of referring to tax, really looking at why price is important. We've illustrated that with some data. We know that price has the most impact on youth initiation and youth, that Colorado does not tax e-cigarettes, and as Jody said, our rate in Pitkin County is 3 times the national average, and that price increases are equity positive. So we're really looking at creating equity across all, equity between users, or ensuring that we're really looking at health disparity amongst users. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
In terms of which part?
All 3, if you have anything to add.
So the most sensitive segment of our population, as Karen mentioned, to price increases are our youth. Pregnant women are the other most responsive demographic to reduce price increases, but we do see an overall decrease in consumption across adults, kids, and as I mentioned, one of the most price sensitive demographics, pregnant women, in terms of increasing the price. Again, this is the most effective policy that we can pass in terms of seeing a reduction in use rates across the overall population. So a very critical policy change.
And I believe you might have seen this before, but just to show what's been going on in our community. So we know that Aspen passed T21, Tobacco 21, so raised the age of purchase. They also passed a retail license within the city, that they also went ahead and did a tobacco tax. And so what they did was they put a $3 tax on a pack of cigarettes, and then they have an escalator on that. So every year that amount goes up by 10 cents. So that's why we're looking at $3.10 right now. For all other tobacco products, it's on a ratio, so it's 40% increase in those. And then the cherry represents that they did a full flavor ban as well. So that's the result of Aspen so far. You can see Basalt has also passed a tax at $2 and 40% on all other tobacco products. Avon passed their own municipal tax. Right now, Eagle is talking about passing a tax on this November's ballot, and they're really discussing everything between $3 and $4. So just to be aware of that, and we're looking at parity and looking at consistency across the valley. That's just something that they're considering and haven't landed on a exact number yet. When they did polling, I believe that they $4 was there's an appetite for $4.
Yes. And that was actually at one point to note with Aspen, that was a starting point for consideration with Aspen. So when they were working on this in the early stages, they had considered $3 to $4 and ended up landing on $3 with a 10-cent escalator at the beginning of every year, to eventually reach that threshold of $4 after a period of 10 years. So that was part of the earlier consideration, but being one of the first in the state and moving forward with a substantial tax increase, they weren't sure what that uncharted territory looked like, but I think looking back, many of the council members think that the public would have been supportive of that in the end.
Question, if I could. Sure. Regarding our valley, it sounds like if we work toward parity, which would be my ambition with our valley, you probably have experience with interstate, illegal commerce or otherwise. I noticed that Wyoming has a 60-cent tax compared to the rest of Colorado. 84 is this. So do you see increased activity for smugglers in that case? What can you tell us about people who are going a long way to get a cigarette deal?
It's a common point of opposition from the tobacco industry that this will drive sales across state, and depending on the proximity to that border. I think one of the best examples that we have to point to in terms of tobacco tax increases, when the state of Minnesota, prior to California passing, was one of the largest in the country. It's $1.60, and they share a border that's less than a mile, if you're unfamiliar with North Dakota and Minnesota's border. But Fargo, West Fargo and Moorhead area is less than a mile. You don't even know you're passing from one state to the next. And substantially, Minnesota's revenue and the decline in use rates amongst their kids and adults were unprecedented. The biggest quit rates that they've had in their history, and the lowest drop, or the biggest drop in youth use rates, and the amount that they've received in revenue far surpassed exponentially what North Dakota was receiving. So they did a great white paper that analyzed all the surrounding states, North Dakota being the lowest. Colorado's low at 84 cents, North Dakota's 44 cents, and currently Minnesota taxes is at over $3. So if there's any incentive for someone to cross the border that's less than a mile, we think that would be a great example of which consumers would be doing so. But what we have found, unfortunately and fortunately, is that our tobacco users are very habitual. So you will see some of that cross-border activity in the first 4 to 6 weeks. But quite frankly, a lot of these tobacco users are buying their last pack, or what they perceive to be their last pack. And so they're in a space of wanting to quit. And so they're not buying cartons at a time. They're buying a pack, 2, maybe 3, if the tobacco industry is effective in their price discounting with coupons and making, that price point a little easier for them to absorb. But we see very little of that after a 4 to 6 week time frame after a tax is passed. And that's true of the state level and local level.
Thank you.
And we were seeing that just with the city of Aspen. They saw a lot more revenue than they thought, and we're not even a mile.
Yep.
Where you can buy.
It's a very similar situation
Pitkin
locally.
County. Mm-hmm. And what's the state? We've all been lobbied by. Who's been calling us? Michigan, Minnesota. It's one of those M states over there.
I don't know where
Has
they.
anybody else received the call?
Mackinac Institute?
What?
Probably the Mackinac Institute.
No. It's
Former
a
lobbyist in
neighborhood
Colorado.
retail institute. It's some neighborhood retail. It's somebody calling because they think the impact to retail sales of cigarettes is going to be negatively impacted by this. And she called to lobby me, and I finally, this third call, I said, just to let you know, my father died of lung cancer. I've got the health background for cigarette use and tobacco issues. I raised 2 kids, blah, blah, blah. And I said, if you're calling to lobby me, you're calling the wrong person. Excuse me. It wasn't me, it was him. Yeah. So I said, I just don't appreciate these phone calls. But I know she's been reaching out to other members of this board already in light of this. And she's coming from, I think, one of those states that may be surrounded by states that have lower taxes. So
It's a really common opposition point by the industry to create fear amongst elected officials that they are going to impact businesses in a negative way, and the data just doesn't support that. So when asked to reveal the data that supports that claim, they can't produce it, and certainly they have the resources to be able to do those studies, to be able to demonstrate those points, but quite frankly, they don't exist.
she was very nice, and then I haven't received a call since I asked her not to call me again, that I didn't appreciate being lobbied from an organization on the other side of the country.
Kelly's next.
Beyond the amount of revenue that Aspen has collected, are they tracking any changes in use among varieties of populations? Do you want to speak to that?
The last time we talked with CJ, they were just starting to get that data, unless you have heard
I
anything
haven't
more.
seen the data, but we generally don't recommend a city or a county or a state start to do an analysis on that data until at least a timeline of 12 months has passed, just because we do know within that 4 to 6 week time period there is some cross-border purchasing that happens or some online sales. There's a small percentage of it, but we do know that happens within the 4 to 6 weeks. The other thing that's important to reference with Aspen is they didn't include what we refer to as a floor or inventory tax. So there's a delay in the amount of revenue that's incoming, and it sometimes does distort the use rates in terms of what we know has happened in terms of that price increase and their impacts. And a floor and inventory tax is important because it taxes whatever current inventory that retailers have on their shelves. And so if you don't include that in your language, there is a delay until they work through all of that inventory, until
really?
the new tax takes effect. Yeah, and so that's important to include that language. Otherwise, those products remain taxed at the lower level until it's implemented, and then they move through that inventory tax. And
I
then
never would have thought of that.
So we talked to Aspen about that early on. I think all of you in the room are probably familiar with the conversation being around public health, and that was truly the motivation for them moving forward, not the revenue. So they were okay with the revenue playing a little bit of catch up and not having that incoming revenue also at the beginning. So there's some factors that play into that. So we really don't recommend looking at the data until at least 12 months, and then we get a stronger sense of what those impacts are down the road. But what I will also say is Aspen is true of some of our resort communities, is there's very transient population that come through these areas, as you all know. Ski population, people from around the world that are traveling internationally and are already socialized to some of these higher price points. And so I also encouraged folks there not to be discouraged if they don't see some of the reductions early on because of that. So it'll require a much deeper dive into the data.
Can we, I don't know when they plan to survey the high school groups again, but I think that there should be a question asked about, did the impact of the price increases in tobacco, did that affect your tobacco use or experimentation?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know how they'll answer, but I think it'd be a question worth asking.
Sorry, back to Kelly and then Steve.
So I just anticipate the tobacco industry to be as nimble as they can and create products that we've not expected. I don't know, candies, oils, patches, whatever. And does this language allow or incorporate, future tax against any new products that might come down? Or would we revisit this decision to do so?
Critically important is the way that the tobacco products are defined. So that is something you want to put an eagle eye onto. And part of the reason that e-cigarettes and vaping devices remain untaxed at the state level in Colorado is because these products weren't on the market, so they weren't included in a definition that no one could really foresee would be a product of the future, that we're plugging products into a USB drive to charge them to be able to use them as a vaping device. That just wasn't foreseeable. So it wasn't included in the state definition, which is why they evade being taxed currently, and that's being looked at more closely again at the state level, as you saw some activity last state session to include these products in taxation. There's definitely an appetite to do that. But in response to your question, they are always 10 steps ahead, and so we should anticipate there will be products that we can't conceive of now that will be coming, one of which that actually has a pending application with the FDA. It's had a pending application for some time, and it just got recent approval, and it's being test marketed in 2 areas of the country. It's referred to as IQOS, very similar to our vaping devices, a little bit different technology. It's referred to as heat not burn, but those are products that we should anticipate coming to the market and ensure that our language and our tobacco product definition is built and defined in such a way that it captures these products that are currently on the market and those that we know will be coming in the future, because that technology is being refined and we know that those products are coming.
Kelly, I think you had a follow-up?
No,
Can I just tag on to Kelly's real quickly? So when we're looking at the ballot language, and we talked about this at our last meeting, should we make it more inclusive and say any product that includes nicotine? So we don't have to worry about what's the next sort of product that comes along. If that's really the issue that we want to get at in terms of nicotine as a health risk, why don't we just blanket that as part of our ballot initiative?
But then it affects nicotine patches and nicotine gum that people are using to get off of tobacco. So we might have to do an exclusionary except for prescription products or whatever.
Usually we do recommend including in the language an exclusion for any FDA-approved device for cessation. As we know, a lot of our vaping product in the industry will claim that they assist people in quitting.
They're not FDA approved.
Yeah, but they're not FDA approved, and they can go through a formal application process with the FDA in order to seek and retain that approval. It's not yet been done to date, and so they are not a formally approved cessation device. And so there is generally an exclusion for that. We do have model language that we generally recommend that's all encompassing, and I'd be happy to share that for your review if it's something you'd like to include. But the one thing related to the nicotine reference is that what we're seeing also now, although it's not cost effective to do it, but we have seen areas where or synthetic nicotine is being produced. And so you just want to make sure if there's any reference to natural versus synthetic, you want to make sure that you're capturing all the products, because at some point that may be cost effective to produce synthetic nicotine versus a natural source. It's not currently, but it could be down the road. So again, it's just something you want to take an eagle eye at and make sure you get that part as correct as you can and as accurate as you can, because that really does define what comes next and what's included and not.
Steve had a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, is this $3 or $2, that in addition to the 84-cent state tax? So people buying a pack actually would be paying $3.94 right now in Aspen? Is that correct?
That was 80.
Okay. Then second question or issue would have to do with the visitors who come to Aspen from Europe or Brazil or Argentina or Australia, where some countries have different perception of smoking. So has there been any feedback from foreign or visitors from other parts of the United States in terms of this is one more thing that they have to pay so much more in Aspen. I might take my vacation somewhere else going forward. But likewise, do they have a stiff tax on those places where they come from, like in other countries?
I haven't heard any feedback amongst guests that have been coming to Aspen, and I could certainly reach out to the city to see if they've gotten any feedback from the lodging industry or from their guests. We will be reaching out to our local retailers, of course, as we go through this process, and just having dialogues with them and discussing this tax with them. But as far as the guests, I haven't heard. And Jody, I don't know if you've
Depending on which country they're traveling from internationally will depend on what level of taxation they've been socialized to. There's tremendous amount of work being done across the world, a number of countries that have both signed and ratified what's referred to as the Framework Convention for Tobacco Control. It's an international treaty that includes price increases and taxation as one of the committed policies that they work to pursue. So there's been a lot of activity around the world internationally on this. So I would speculate that many of the visitors that are traveling here have already been acclimated to some of those higher price points than what we're seeing here, especially if they've done any travel throughout this country to New York or California, where the additional price per pack of cigarettes exceeds $4. So again, Colorado being 84 cents, well below the threshold. But in other areas of the country, particularly in the Northeast right now, they're over $4 per pack for a state level tax.
Steve, I think if anything, the one thing that they'd be most affected by is the fact you can't smoke in public places, in restaurants or hotels. I think that would bother them more, but, I don't think they've seen a drop in tourism in, as I've said, Laguna Beach, California, since they banned it citywide.
Yeah, Beverly Hills did a all-comprehensive ban with the restriction only to a few cigar shops and then concierge lounges within some of these hotel locations. But aside from that, they cannot purchase any tobacco products citywide.
It says you can't smoke in the whole municipality of Laguna Beach.
And it's not
except in the
something.
privacy of your own home.
Yeah, and it's not something we're just seeing here in the United States. We're seeing this across the world. Places where you'd think you'd never encounter a smoke-free in public places policy, we're seeing it enacted in places like Beijing and Russia, a number of countries across Europe, Ireland, of course, being the first, which everyone thought in the early days of smoke-free, you can't have a pint of Guinness without having a smoke, and they proved everyone across the world wrong.
The whole country did, right?
Yeah, the whole country. Mm-hmm. And they were the first in Europe to do so.
Kelly?
So if we're looking at Aspen's model, will they go to 320 in tax in 2020? So January 2020?
1st, 2020, they will escalate to $3.20. Mm-hmm.
So if we're looking at parity that way, does it make sense for us to start to put 320 on the ballot, since the language, I guess, would start in January of 2020?
Mm-hmm.
To escalate to $4 over X amount of years, like the
Or
cities.
yeah,
Yeah.
escalate to 420 over 10 years, whatever.
And they will, over the 10-year time frame, Aspen will increase every year until they reach the $4 threshold. And again, that reflects back to their early conversations around whether or not to increase by $3 or $4. And this seemed to be the compromise that was struck in terms of, again, being in uncharted territory, not knowing how people would respond. But the escalator will reach $4 at some point. So Karen and I were discussing this earlier. if you were to put on the ballot $4 for consideration, knowing that Aspen will catch up to that at some point, it's still pretty closely in line with, the amount that they'll have in terms of their taxation. There's not a huge differentiation between the two that should be changing consumer behavior and purchasing.
And I just add, our speakers aren't working in the back, so if we could really try and project, some folks in the back are having a hard time hearing.
Okay.
Well, the press could move up to the front of the room.
So, for me, it seems like when we talk about parity or more the case consistency, and the message we want to get out, I would support getting in line with Aspen's as they move into 2020. So whatever that rate will be, but if it's $3.20, that way, whether you're trying to buy a pack in Aspen or the Airport Business Center or Old Snowmass, it's very consistent. So it makes it easier to get the message out, perhaps less confusing for the consumer. And then with that, then I'm hoping that Snowmass would then get on board as well to provide that last part of Pitkin County to join in for that consistent message.
Agreed.
And Snowmass did have conversations about price increases in their recent discussions around tobacco retail licensure and raising the age of sale to 21. So I think it's definitely something that's on their radar and has been part of their discussion, in addition to replicating some of the activity and flavors and menthol in Aspen as well.
Are we gonna get into the flavors and the youth? I wanted to make sure we discussed briefly, at least, the youth statistics that came to the Board of Health on how our schools and our community seems to be number one in the state for tobacco and vaping use, and our state's number one in the country. And it's not a number one I really appreciate us being. And I was hoping maybe Jody has some insight to that, because I still have trouble rationalizing that number. It's just hard to believe, but I'm prepared to believe it, but it's a tough one.
Yeah, and it's tough to watch. Working in this, working in tobacco control policy, watching our state lead the nation is not something I'm proud of either. So I share your concern there. But I think the good news is there's a number of things that we know we can do. So we're fortunate in that space to know what policies work in terms of impacting these use rates that we're seeing escalate in our state. One of which is what's being considered and discussed here, which is increasing the price on tobacco. One of the things you may not be aware of that happened back in 2014, Colorado used to lead the nation in our funding for tobacco control, prevention, and cessation programming across the country. And we were funded at a level that was recommended by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And in 2014, those numbers were updated to be more cost specific in terms of what the cost within each individual state would be for a program, and revised some of those numbers. And Colorado was now at under half of what the CDC is recommending. And that plays a direct impact in terms of media messaging, socializing people to tobacco control policy, whether it's smoke-free environments, whether it's the price on tobacco, raising the age of sale. And those are things that our program at the state level just hasn't been funded at a level in which we need to effectively impact and keep these use rates down. So that's a great opportunity actually with the tax increase in terms of looking at revenue allocation to get as much bang for your buck, if you will, is to really ensure that your program is funded at the level recommended by the Centers for Disease Control. Those numbers are very effective in terms of seeing a direct impact in decreasing our use rates, not only amongst our kids, but amongst our adults also. And adults, on average, have 5 to 6 quit attempts before they're effectively able to quit use of the products. So I think funding is part of that price increase. We've been stagnant. It's been well over 10 years since Colorado's increased the price, so people are very familiar with these price points and not impacted. And again, the updating to our vaping laws, minimum age of sale. So there are things we can do, reducing accessibility by increasing our age from 18 to 21 for purchasing or sale of these products to our kids. And then, of course, the flavor menthol provisions and removing those are that is the biggest incentive, I think, for kids to use are these flavored products. And well over 80% are reporting that if they're using a product, it's a flavored product. So we know the impacts that, these gummy bear and Slurpee flavors are having on our kids. I mean, kids that we didn't see in previous data reports across the country that would never have used tobacco are trying these flavors. And because the vaping industry has been so effective at creating this perception that they are only water vapor, kids are reporting also across the state that they see these products as harmless. They don't understand there's a significant level of nicotine in them. They don't understand that a Juul pod is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes. And before they make that realization, they're already addicted. So there's a number of things that can be done. And I think that's the good news. And that's the focus, I think, that we're all discussing here today and in other areas of the state.
So I'm sorry I didn't hear all of what George, but I heard on my way out that he was supporting this, which I am too. But so as far as the T21 or increasing the age, we don't have to do that by vote. We can do, because it's not taxation, we can do that by county ordinance. What do we do?
And-
I think that,
Sorry, Patty, go ahead.
no, but I, that wasn't, it was mentioned in here, but not addressed as an action that we should take, which I think is an action we need to take. The other question I do have is how many retail stores do we have in Pitkin County that, in unincorporated Pitkin County,
So we have 10 retail.
sell cigarettes?
Mhm.
Okay. More than I thought, actually.
Yeah.
Our tax would affect Snowmass Village until they pass their own.
Mm-hmm.
It would? Oh, because they're still part of
They don't
Pitkin
have,
County. And what, does this end of Basalt have one? That end of Basalt have one? So they're, okay. So we should probably run this by Snowmass, or just at least
County
ask them?
question. It's a
But I think we
question.
should still ask them, let them know, bring them into the conversation, just because I think we should.
They're having their own conversation. I think we have our own
I
conversation.
think we should let them know that we're doing this.
Well, I think they'll know. All they do is pick up the paper tomorrow.
I hope they'll follow our
I
lead.
still think we should let them know from us that we're doing this. and
You
not
can let 'em
trust
know.
the press to-
Of course,
Our
Marky
messenger.
Butler's on our Board of Health along with me, and we had this discussion last week, so she's up to speed, so my guess is.
Right,
they'll-
there's other members of our council, I still think we should let them know what we're doing.
Okay, what's next?
Yeah, so we really did segment out the tax conversation with you all today and thought that we would bring back all the other pieces that we've discussed in the past, so the retail licensing and the tobacco 21. And it's fine if you want to make a decision on that, but we'll have more detail to bring back to you at a later date around that. But we wanted to get the tax piece going, recognizing that we have a tight timeline around that. So these are just some components to be thinking about and how you want to make your decision. Jody, I think, has given some really good examples and has some nuance that you can discuss through each of these pieces. But really looking at comparability, we've talked about that we want to think high because we know as price increases, use decreases. It's just the way that that it works. That we should have parity across both the cigarette pack as well as the other tobacco products, because we don't want people to sort of shop, choosing to do snuff over cigarettes, and that it should potentially increase over time. And this, I think there's data that might show positives and negatives to that, but if we wanted to have it in line with Aspen, we could look at that for sure. And so, Jody alluded to this, but the appetite in the city was very high for this, and the data shows it was also high in Pitkin County. And do you want to just, I forget the percentage there, but.
So the numbers in the western part of the state, when we worked on Amendment 72 in 2016, and at that point we were proposing a $1.75 increase. So we felt in talking with Aspen and Basalt and Avon and their consideration of a tax proposal for the voters that was a good starting point to understand what the voter acceptability and tolerance was for some of these higher price points. And resoundingly, it was higher in terms of the voter turnout. For the city level taxes was actually higher. These numbers were higher than what we saw with Amendment 72, which was exciting to see the enthusiasm behind impacting these use rates people are seeing everywhere across the state, quite frankly. But in Aspen's case, 74%, and in Basalt and Avon, the voter threshold and approval was 76%. And I think both those thresholds are thresholds that the councils are extraordinarily proud of in terms of their community response to these.
And so we did bring this to the Board of Health just to get a recommendation to you all to discuss, and this is a baseline for discussion. So the Board of Health had recommended going to $3, maybe $3.20 now, if we're looking at this being implemented in 2020, and that they would be consistent with other tobacco products at 40%. Yes, to the escalator, so that it would go up by 10 cents annually, based up to getting up to the $4 a pack that Aspen has also created, and then potential uses for the revenue. So we know that this program, if we do pass a retail license, there'll be some administration under that, as well as the actual collection of the tax and the administration that goes with this process. So we want to make sure we've built in some dollars to go back into the county in some way around that. That we're also looking at local tobacco and substance use prevention and cessation programs. We really want to focus on prevention and knowing what works. Luckily, public health has been doing this work for a long time and does know what works and has a lot of evidence to show how to reduce youth use. And then we've talked a lot about, this is really focused, a lot of this work is really focused on youth use, and yet we don't really have a youth voice in this process, and we haven't had a youth voice very strongly in this process all along. And so we'd really like to consider building a youth leadership council that doesn't have to live in the county. It could be another agency within the community that has the expertise to do that. But how do we start to get youth involved in this, and youth voice and their expertise, because they have their own lived experiences around this that we want to capture. So those are just some ideas that were recommended to the Board of Health and that they supported. We can also expand out to mental health and some of the other things that we know to be true in this community that need to be addressed. So that's where we're at from the Board of Health.
And I would just add that when you make a public declaration around the use of these funds to somehow benefit or be returned back to the consumer that's paying the tax, this public support for these issues is extraordinarily high. Some of which, a lot of times when we're polling on this issue, we'll see between 70 to 80%, sometimes in the high 80 percentile, when they know these monies are being used to prevent kids from ever starting. Most adult tobacco consumers wish they had never started. If you know a tobacco consumer in your world, they'll tell you it's easy to quit. I've done it a million times. I've done it 100 times. And they say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but that is really a reflection of them trying to quit, wishing they never had. And so when consumers know that these monies in some way are being returned back to the community to prevent kids from ever starting, or in some way helping adult users quit by providing adequate cessation services and funding, the percent of support for these tobacco tax increases is really high.
Kelly?
Do we need to specify the use of the tax revenue in the ballot question?
We don't need to specify the use, as far as I know, John. I think we just want it more for talking
Sure,
points.
yeah.
There isn't a default, so we should specify it. Might be able to infer that it defaults to the general fund, but I think it should be clear where the money's going on the tax ballot.
And then a second question I have is, do you have is there a youth profile of user? Are we seeing, I don't know, wealthier kids purchase more nicotine products, or, kids from single parent homes, or I don't know, anything like that?
I mean, the best data source we have is Healthy Kids Colorado, and that's done every other year in the school district. And it's not, as far as I know, they don't break it down by demographic information. So it's broken down by school, so we can get middle and high school data. But Jody, I don't know if you know of any other data sources that would give us that.
I don't believe that there's that refined of a breakdown with the data, but it's a fair question to ask in terms of we're seeing it across different demographics more than others. But I would say the vaping product in particular is crossing a lot of thresholds in terms of age in areas around the state. So it's really created an entirely different landscape than what we've seen before.
And I guess I just ask that because if we're thinking about like a youth council, whose voice, is there a more refined voice that we would want to cultivate or target?
Yeah, I think trying to outline the uses in the ballot question just ensures more voter confidence that we're not just creating this to put more money into our general fund coffers. So I think that would be important as best we could to identify. And I don't know if this flies in the face of Tabor, John, but is there a way to put into a ballot question reconsideration as to increasing or decreasing this tax after 10 years, rather than having to go write it in that we'll increase automatically after 10 years by 10%, 10 cents annually after the 10 years? That's what that is, yes, and the yes recommendation to inflate and the normalization in tax should increase. Oh, but that's only for the first till $4.
Till $4.
Is there a way to write in there that after it's reached that $4 because of inflation and, what was the other word you used? Inflation and something.
Normalization.
Normalization, thank you. That we would just reconsider increasing that on a annual basis? I don't know how you can do that and not flying the,
Any increase has to be approved by the voters.
so even if we wrote in there after 10 years, you still have to go back because of Tabor, so what was my
You have to
thinking?
go, the voters have to approve whatever it is. You can not have a cap of $4 like the city did, just have an increase that goes on indefinitely. You can do that. If the voters support it, then that's what the tax will be. If it caps, then to increase it beyond that, you'll have to go back to the voters.
Could we put a cap on it with an increase up to the discretion of the board either to, in other words, to enact that increase after we reach $4? I'm
Well,
trying to give us some leniency.
It
so we
still
don't-
has to be authorized by the voters, and so the discretion that we would find with the board is discretion that's been given by the voters already. So,
I was just trying to find a way that after we reach $4, we could reconsider, we could reevaluate after that $4 and either increase it or choose not to increase it without having to go back to the voters. Get what I'm trying to say,
if you
John?
want to increase it, and you want that ability to establish initially with the tax, then that has to be part of the question.
You have to establish a number, not just after we reach the $4, we could make an annual determination as to whether or not we wanted to increase.
Or, let me try and reframe. Maybe after, could you say something like, we're going to increase it by 10 cents every year, and after 10 years, the Board of County Commissioners can freeze it or not, or allow it to continue to increase? So
That's what I'm
the
saying.
authorization is let it increase in perpetuity unless the BOCC decides to freeze any rate increase.
Well, it's not like a mill where it's set by the board. It's a sales tax issue, so once it's approved, it's set. I mean, it's there.
That's just cleaner to do it that way and say to $4. I don't want to just randomly say, once we reach $4, we're going to increase it by 10 cents every year from now on. I mean, then why do we have a cap at $4? So, but I think that we should have the opportunity without having to go back to the voters if after we reach $4, we decide that, we want to increase it.
You can build in escalators that are other than a percentage or a fixed amount, like 20 cents or something. You can tie an escalator to some other economic index, like CPI or
It's just for
something
discussion.
else. Or you can also tie it to the sales of tobacco products within the jurisdiction. If they have, they level off or stop like that, you can relate it to something, but the voters have to be able to approve something that they
Clear.
know what it is they're approving.
Just food for thought, that we might want to talk about that.
If I could, I'd bring up the recommended use of the revenue. If we're going to have administration be part of it, I think that should be either capped or measured so people know what that means. Does 90% go to administration or does 10? And do we stay at 10 regardless?
I think it's transparent as you can be. The public will respond to that. Different municipalities between Aspen, Avon, and Basalt have handled this differently. So some have allocated to be directed to the general fund, but on record, they made a public declaration of the categories in which those monies would be spent once the revenue was collected. So they've handled this differently depending on the community, but all of them have publicly declared in some way that it would be allocated and directed to a public health related category, if you will. And that recommendation also is in part due to, the more specified you get in a specific program or line item, if that program or line item somewhere down the line goes away, you don't want to have to create a situation where you're going back to the voters for reapproval. And so there's a recommendation to be a little bit more generic, but also be as transparent as possible in terms of being on record, identifying where these will go.
I have another question. In the sample ballot language,
I think we just got sound.
yeah.
I think we just got it.
In the sample ballot language in our packet, it leads off with a maximum tax revenue amount increase. Do we need to specify that? Okay.
Tabor requirements generally, they will require that you estimate to the best of your ability the amount that you expect to bring in. And so the problem with that is that if you estimate low and you recover higher amounts, like Aspen, the situation Aspen is in, that then you have to return to the voters and request approval to retain those funds. And that's what Aspen's doing on the ballot this year. Basalt is in a similar situation in terms of estimating low and getting much higher amounts than what they had predicted. And Avon estimated high and probably will be under that threshold, so they won't have to return to the voters or hit the pause button in terms of their collection, which is what Basalt is currently doing. Basalt, just for reference, over the last 6 months, July to December of last year, collected around $175,000. So considerably higher than what they had thought, and their share back revenue, their forfeiture amount was around $16,000. So this far surpassed what they were thinking they might generate. So I think the recommendation here is to the best of your ability, estimate what you expect to receive and then build in a buffer, a percentage above that to ensure that you are under that threshold.
This
With
may
an
be,
escalator for every year.
oh, sorry. This may be an opportunity to have our financial advisory board. They're going to be meeting on August 12th, and this is a question we might be able to put in front of them also.
Well, just tying into that real quick, because that was going to be my question. On the city's ballot question, technically their last statement was, didn't they de-Bruce with that technically? The city may collect and retain and expend all the revenues of such taxes and the earnings thereon, notwithstanding the limitation. Blah, blah. John, what does that mean?
I couldn't hear you.
The last sentence was that city may collect, retain, and expend all of the revenues of such taxes. It's not me, it's him with this mic over there. And the earnings thereof, notwithstanding the limitations of Article 10, Section 20 of the Colorado Constitution or any of that. Isn't that a de-Brucing statement?
So Patty, the way I think that works is it's de-Bruce going forward after the first year. So the issue that the city had in
Was their
over-collecting.
2018 amount.
It's just that 2018 amount where the estimate was, the actual revenues came in higher than the estimate. So I think it's a 1-year issue, and then the de-Brucing, the Tabor calculations kick in.
So if we didn't put in an estimated amount and just put in that de-Brucing paragraph, would we not be okay?
I have to check that, but the only language I've ever seen that comports with Tabor always has a max.
So for the first year, they only did it for the first year on the city.
Yeah, you only have.
So
you
we
have to
could
have
just
it.
estimate high for this first year round and then wouldn't have to worry about it in the future.
Well, that's always the best advice is to estimate high.
And I noticed in the city's ballot language, they didn't specify what the uses were going to be.
Right.
Interesting. So it looks like it's just going into the general fund.
Which it does, but they had a public declaration on record indicating where those monies would be spent.
I'd rather put it in the ballot question.
Steve?
I would rather have it tied to a consumer price index in some fashion. So if there's no inflation in a year, the amount wouldn't go up. If there was hyperinflation, it would go up faster. We don't know what's going to happen with money going forward, but Aspen, with their 10 cents per year, if there's hyperinflation, that will be sort of meaningless kind of an increase. Also, I would love to see some of it, have the possibility to put some of it just into public health or senior issues or something to do with the general health of the whole population, because the smoking affects, the healthcare costs of everybody. And if we have the possibility, not knowing what revenue we're gonna get, we might have way more than we need for the three things we have thought of. And if we could put it into a broader general welfare of the whole populace, I think that would be a good option.
If I could add on to what Steve was saying, I was thinking along the same lines that if we have $650 per family per year in Colorado, that's the public cost of smoking. Maybe the revenue could go toward an integrated health services, something that anyone could participate in that would help health across the board. So everyone feels that they're benefiting from it. That would be worth talking about.
I think the more you can create a nexus, the stronger the level of support. I think what we see in our polling locally, statewide, nationally, is that people don't want to see it in a general budget where it can be used to fill potholes in a road, perhaps, as one example. Although incredibly important, people want to see some relationship to the nexus of public health, given that this is a public health issue, and that's where we see the highest level of support.
Thank you.
I guess just my last comment on that is, I think one option could be to say, revenues shall be used to cover real and actual costs of administration and cessation programs, and then any remainder may go to integrated health, youth council, something like that, just so we're really saying it has to go to these things first, and then
But there's a nexus to the.
where there's more, they can go into broader categories or something.
I think to your point, the most challenging part about these projections is not knowing what you're going to bring in. I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges because, as you said, you may collect more than what is needed or required for the three things that you might be discussing. And so allowing yourself some flexibility in that, knowing that it could be considerably higher than what you're anticipating, particularly given the vaping category. It's an untaxed product in the state, and so that's shifting a lot of our numbers as well because we haven't taxed this product before. And so we're starting to collect now some of that data in these three communities that have taxed them to determine what those numbers look like, but still uncharted somewhat.
I would like to see that the ballot kept as simple as possible because we know as ballots become more wordy, people start to ignore it, and it gets confusing. So when you start making specifics in terms of how those dollars are getting used, I would keep more of a generic approach. It's going to be used for however the Board of Health would like to word it. But keep that short and simple. That's, I think we've already seen that the City of Aspen voters pass it by 65%. City of Aspen voters are our voters. So I think we'll get the strong support, but I would just caution that we don't have a very lengthy ballot. I mean,
Well,
Kelly.
as a specific to that, the elections department will request it be 200 words or less.
Can't get too wordy, but I agree with you, George. We need to have something in there, but not too much something.
Good point. Okay. Should
Good
we
work.
move on to the next part?
T21. The next part,
What's next? Anything else here?
So
our next.
Have you got direction on that?
can I confirm the direction?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So we will work on some buckets around how the revenue could possibly be used, keep the ballot language as general as possible, but to have some prevention and education kind of language around certainly substance use and youth use. That we are looking at doing some sort of estimation with the FAB as far as what we anticipate as far as revenue. I'm looking at John, to get some advice from them so that we can put that overarching dollar amount at the very top of the ballot language. We are looking at, as far as I know, I don't know if we landed on the price. That's what I'm a little confused about. Are we looking at $3.20 to match Aspen with some sort of escalator, but not entirely sure if we'll escalate in perpetuity or or if we want to tie it to the CPI. I'm not sure what we landed on for
I
that.
think we should have the Financial Advisory Board help us with that, but I think what I heard was that most of us are saying we should stay in line with what's being done locally.
Agree with that.
This keeps it clean.
Okay.
But if the Financial Advisory Board has some big idea to add to this, I'd certainly like to hear it. But parity with Aspen's perhaps the most important. You want to come up to a mic?
Or the two mics?
Or two mics? You get stereo.
Anne Driggers, Finance Director, and also kind of administrator for the Financial Advisory Board. So I just wanted to make sure our timing is all good here, because they're actually meeting on August 12th. And I was thinking, and I don't know if that's enough time, because you're having the first hearing on August 14th. So I was more thinking about just reviewing what you decide rather than them helping you figure out what the numbers are. I don't think the timing's going to work.
I need then to maybe we make a decision sooner than that.
Well, it's just first reading, so we could always amend it if we needed to for second read, right? Second reading is not until the 28th. No, it's 5th.
Limited scope that we're having to look at.
Yeah. Just dates, just giving you, I don't,
What if we were to look at parity with Aspen up until the $4 limit and then a CPI increase after that, and then we'll just have to see what happens from there.
John's got a knit brow. over there.
Aspen will have to do something also, but at least we'll be in parity with them up to that point,
And then we'll go our own way.
or they'll come with us.
They have to go back to the voters.
Yeah, and I think
will
Aspen's
too,
commitment
right?
is to return at
They
some
will.
point, and they did indicate during their proceedings that they may have a substantial increase between now and the next 10 years with this escalator and revisit a higher amount, knowing that we generate public health outcomes from price points that are higher, not necessarily the escalators. And so they did talk about building in the 10 cents every year, but not excluding the fact they may go to voters before that with a more substantial amount in between that timeline too. They wanted to allow themselves flexibility to do that. The one thing I'll just mention too is I don't know if you've seen Aspen's worksheet, but their finance manager also put together a projection sheet, a worksheet they worked from to try to estimate to the best of their ability what they'd expect to generate. Obviously, they were a little bit off, but that information is public if you'd like to just see it and see what factors they were considering in terms of criteria. It might be a helpful starting point to consider.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your information.
Do you
Sorry.
need more from us,
The
Karen, on
only
that?
other piece was the other tobacco products at 40%.
That's what the city does? We should,
I think I would be in favor of staying with that.
So one thing I'll just mention too, and just pros and cons for your own context. Parity across products is something that our organization recommends. So we're not incentivizing a user to potentially evade a tax on one product and dual use and use the other product, or to supplement it to have a more equivalent price they're paying across products. Aspen's is very close right now. It's within the percentage of margin. But as you build in these escalators, that throws those numbers up a little bit. So I just want you to be aware of that as you build in these escalators, you create a differentiation. And I can provide information about this because it gets a little complicated, but a differentiation amongst products, from cigarettes being taxed at a higher equivalency rate than our other tobacco products, which is all products outside of combustible cigarettes, which includes our vaping devices. So just wanted you to be aware of that part of the conversation. Currently, the state tax rate on other tobacco products is 40% of manufacturer's price. When Aspen increased theirs, they essentially doubled it. So they went from 40 to 80%. And we do have those parity projections across different dollar amounts that are being considered from other counties as well that we've been asked to put together. So I'm happy to share that information with you. But I'm hearing first and foremost from you that parity with Aspen is probably your priority. And then maybe secondary to that might be some of these numbers.
Pat?
the other thing we didn't actually discuss was, does this tax apply to what's sitting on the shelf now or sitting on the shelf as of, and for me, it should be applied to what's sitting on the shelf now.
We advocate including a floor inventory tax. As I said, when we discussed this with Aspen, their incentive was public health, not revenue-based, and so they were adamant about not they weren't adamant about not including it. They were somewhat indifferent about whether it was included or not because it seemed to be more revenue-based than public health outcomes associated with it, but we strongly recommend to see some of those impacts immediately to include it.
I think it's public health or it's public health, and this is public health.
Our recommendation would be to include it
Yeah.
and language around it.
Is that just to check in, is that the board, does the whole board agree?
Or is it just me?
I know.
Lone Ranger here.
Not that that's not important, Matty. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, good.
Okay. All right. Okay, so
Thanks,
you're
John.
clear on that. What's
Okay,
next?
so the retailers don't have incentive to buy tons in December. And
I know, that's what I'm
stock
thinking.
it
They've
for
gotten stocked
January.
up.
Okay, yeah.
So are we okay with us bringing this back to you in a first read? Do we need to schedule another work session, or we feel?
Unless you have concern that it's not addressed, I don't see a reason we don't,
I'd say first
don't
read.
you think? I mean,
Fine with me.
unless something comes up.
Now, you're going to get onto flavor here, aren't you?
We're going to bring that back to you in another session. So after we get through the tax, we're going to pick that back up again.
And what we can do about online sales or marketing on television.
Yeah, so all the questions you all had at the last meeting, work session, we'll bring answers back to you around that. And then we'll talk about flavor ban, retail licensing, tobacco 21 again, and package that up for you. So if that's okay, if we wait on that.
Right.
Tax is the one I think that is most time sensitive, given the requirements in which to work backwards to get this on the ballot. And it's not to say that the others aren't equally important, because obviously we prioritize them as well, but I think this is one that's most time sensitive for the considerations at hand.
Okay.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you
extra
very
time.
much for coming.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for prioritizing
Thanks,
Pincon's
Jody.
kids. We appreciate your work in this space tremendously.
Where did you come from? Where are you? Are you in Denver or?
No, so I am a mountain mouse, country mouse, so I am not an urban mouse, so I do not reside in Denver. I'm in Loveland towards the Rocky Mountain National Park area, so I'm up towards the Estes Park area of the state.
Nice for you.
Equally beautiful, and
Yeah.
to where I'm at now, just a little less cost associated with living that area than over this way, but equally beautiful.
Well, thanks for
Well,
coming.
thank you for coming
You're
in.
welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the review of future agenda calendars. John Peacock, you're up.
Thanks, Greg. Just have a few items for you. First, we're working on scheduling our joint meetings with Snowmass Village and Basalt. I'd note for Snowmass Village, there's a change, I think, on your current future agendas. It's showing Tuesday, September 17th. The actual date that works for Snowmass is Thursday, September 19th.
A Thursday?
Yeah, so it's a little bit off of your regular meeting schedule, but it's what we could line up for both bodies. We'd intend to do a dinner meeting like we have recently done, and we are scheduling. You'll see right now there's not prep time scheduled. Charlotte's working on getting prep time put together for those.
September 19th?
Correct.
Great.
Works for me.
We're also looking at the Healthy Rivers and Streams Board has requested time to do a joint meeting. Working with Lisa right now, but that is looking like it might line up on your September 24th meeting for about an hour or so. And then when we do the prep for Snowmass Village and Basalt, we'll bring back the idea of maybe senior services coming and talking about the aging well plan, as there's some desire to get coordinated between the municipalities and the county there before it's adopted. And that's all I have on future agendas.
I have one, but now that I've got taken back from this joint meeting with Snowmass, and forgive me if I missed something, but we have on August 14th, we have the second reading of the Sunfire Ranch Open Space Preservation Master Plan. Oh, I guess maybe it was the conservation easement we were still talking about, but did we have a first reading? Did we? I don't think we've had a first reading yet, have we?
I thought that was on the agenda for the day.
Yeah.
or the
When?
day I was in
See,
the hospital.
I don't have, I've got to dig
The
up my electronic record
26th?
here.
I thought we had that was our joint meeting with Open Space and Trails, but just forgive me if I'm confused, but I don't remember an official first reading.
I thought we continued it.
For more information, and that was technically, wasn't it part of our joint meeting with Open Space and Trails?
Why don't we look at that?
Just to clarify. Yeah, so I think we're all confused. I'm not the only one confused on that one, or doesn't remember. Okay. And that, believe it or not, was the only thing I have on future agendas.
Steve?
On our today's agenda, it has Karen Schroyer's going away party on Wednesday, the 24th.
Yeah, it's
And I thought it
actually
was
Thursday.
It's Thursday.
It is Thursday, the 25th.
Okay, I
so-
thought maybe I had missed a communication when I was gone, but I
No,
just
so
wanted
we
to
will,
confirm.
yeah, we need to get that corrected. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
No, Steve, it's the 24th, just so.
24th is a Wednesday.
Well, at least if you show up early, you're not going to miss it. If you show
I don't
up
want
a
to
day
show
late,
up
you never get
24
to go.
hours early.
You'll be hungry by then.
Okay.
I have a couple
Oh,
things.
sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
What is the topic regarding environmental funding for August 6th? With Lindsay Naish.
Here, let me just look at that real quick.
Which date was that?
August 6th.
August 6th.
I thought it had something to do with,
It's very broad.
Environmental. Gosh, and
Was it
you're
clarification?
showing that on, oh, environmental.
first thing.
Oh, yeah. So that is to clarify for the Healthy Community Fund. There was a discussion last year about, how our, whether it's climate action plan or environmental goals being expressed or evaluated in terms. And so and we'll try and put some more detail around that, but they have been working through an option of how that might occur. So ahead of the grant review committee looking at it, I think they want to confirm with you guys.
And then I see on August 14th, we have the SKICO application, and I guess I thought we were doing a special meeting on the 21st and then the 28th, so I want to make sure I'm prepared if we are also discussing it on the 14th.
No, Greg won't be here.
No, we're not. Yeah, we did.
We're not. We're changing it, and
We're going to continue it again, or just when we meet tomorrow, we're continuing it to the 21st?
I think tomorrow is when you're continuing it to the 20. There's been different continuances, so
Yeah.
well, but the object is the 21st and 28th.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. And then not on these, but I wanted to request board time about a conversation regarding childcare capacity in the valley. And there's just a lot bubbling. I've had requests from Kids First to come and present to our board. John and I received a request from the Aspen Community Foundation to present the Cradle to Career initiative.
Again.
And there's just a variety of opportunities that I think would merit some discussion for us if we want to help support some projects that are being contemplated to create more capacity for childcare. But we don't have I think, clear idea about what our commitment is to that issue, or if we want to be a player in that realm. And so John and I talked, and I thought I would request to the board some time on future agendas to get some presentations and initiate that conversation.
Yeah, and I think too, in light of that, I agree with Kelly, but in light of the city bumping childcare up to the top of their goals, we also have to keep in mind, we don't have a funding mechanism as the city does, but there's also this regional effort. Right now, I don't think it's going to include Pitkin County. There's a Mid-Valley regional effort for a possible taxing district for childcare. But I think we do need to be more brought up to speed with what's going on regionally with childcare and how maybe we could address it in other ways rather than direct funding to a cause, but maybe bring it in like a housing mitigation fee or something.
Yeah.
And there's other opportunities out there, and we just never had that discussion.
And that was the discussion Kelly and I had is we haven't had that discussion as a board, or you haven't had that discussion as a board. So at the staff level, we don't have clear direction on how we might play too. So it sounds like really it would be gathering some presentations on kind of current state and what are the current conversations about what might be happening valley-wide, it sounds like. And then bring back a conversation to you as a board about if and how
We can be part of
you
it.
all want to give direction about how we might participate in those
Because
efforts.
Kelly and I both have been trying to participate in the Basalt Child Care Coalition, which brings together factors valley-wide to the table. And Kelly and I are just kind of sitting at the table just so we can hear what's going on, so it'd be nice. And I think as part of it, it would be great maybe to have the mayor invited, since Tori's been really involved in pushing this to the top of the city's goals.
Is that good with everyone?
Yeah, that's fine. But speaking of housing mitigation fees, that seems like that's dropped off our radar.
John's
So-
still working on it, as far as I understand. John Ely still.
Yeah, John Ely has had that on his plate for a little bit now, and so we can ask John for an update on that. But it is high on our priorities. We need to get that done.
Yeah.
Okay, is that? All right, we're going to move on to open discussion.
I really I had John Kinney on there again, but I'm continuing to do the airport updates on the
Onto that too.
process.
But is there any other open discussion?
Any other open discussion?
Oh.
Only other thing occurred to me was that in conversation with Joy DeSalvo about how we have candidates coming into town to collect money and then leave, and it's both parties do it, but they don't really do any public outreach or public meetings with the public, and that kind of bothers me. And he does follow up and collect money. He thinks that it shouldn't be paid for by the public unless they're actually meeting people in the public. And I just thought I'd put it out there to see if anyone else is concerned about that and wants to say anything.
I don't know what purview we have, since it comes out of Joey's budget, right? That's why he's the one pushing the issue. I think we've all supported Joey in that effort to do his best. I think it's, again, it's just something Joey does regardless of party affiliation on these efforts, these funding parties that get thrown here in our community. So I don't know.
I would just love to encourage them to give a speech at the Pepka Park gazebo while they blow through town with
I think
their
the Secret
briefcase.
Service would love that one, but we do try to encourage it, but I don't know
Yeah.
how.
Joe's been pretty successful when he knows who is hosting the event and approaching them and helping everyone to understand the public benefit versus the public burden of a private event that needs to be subsidized with taxpayer dollars. And he's had quite a bit of success in getting reimbursement for those costs. That is not always the case. You may have read in the paper today that is not the case with the most recent visit, at least so far. I don't know if anything has changed today. It may be you all have the fiscal response, so you approve budgets and revenues and those sorts of things. It's not an area where you could probably require the reimbursement. It would be more of a policy statement around where you would seek reimbursement and for what reasons, to be consistent with the sheriff if you wanted. I think is kind of what you're saying.
Can't
Right.
make them pay us as they disembark the airplanes.
We might give them a public shaming incentive to at least give a speech while they're in town.
Yeah.
Well,
Meet some
separately,
people.
I guess I wondered, do we invite our federal reps for town halls in our community? Yeah. Do we send out an annual, we invite you to host a town hall in Pitkin County?
It has not
Been
been
unwritten.
annually. In the past, I think it's been more issue-based. If something's coming up, there's been encouragement And sometimes the representatives are just coming here and doing it on their own. So, but no, we have not made like an annual, would you come and do a town hall here?
We definitely support any of those who choose to do it, but, well,
And that would be-
we have Secret Service here,
Another option for you guys.
unless they're,
Okay, just, we can always, if anybody else has a opinion on it. But we could move on if that's all we've got.
Gosh, I noticed that APSHA's last meeting is tomorrow, the current board of APSHA, rather than the 31st.
I thought it was the
I thought
30th.
it was last week.
They have to, tomorrow is a special meeting just to clean up their decisions from last week because there was an appeal. And I think the sitting board wants to hear that appeal and make a decision. Otherwise, it has to go through a whole new process with a new board. So that's why it's just a special meeting tomorrow. One item on it, and it should be.
You wanted to
Right, and
recognize
well,
the
I did
board.
want to recognize the board, or I don't know. If we still.
They got a cake last week.
We did that last.
Okay.
John was there, I was there, and Phyllis was there, and we recognized the board, and they had a little party and celebration afterwards, so.
Okay. Well, I missed it.
Yeah, so
I did too. I just saw him get a cake. I don't know. You didn't cook it. You didn't bake it. I was.
Well, thank you. I'm glad
Kelly
that
didn't bake
you
it.
followed
yeah, we did
Appreciate it.
make the effort to go and
Okay.
thank the current board members for their service. And
Thank you.
All three of us spoke.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the ASA visioning update.
And something out for you.
Are these the ones you left on the computer when you went to your meeting yesterday?
Yeah, well, I left even more stuff.
I want the name tag.
Just don't bring it up on the.
Yeah, this was the one.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course I only have 5 copies. So. Just handed this out, Mark, for the graphics. Last time I was in front of you, it introduced that we were getting ready to go through a dot voting exercise on a set of continua with all of the different committees. And you'll see that there's 2 continua. The green dots are a straw vote at the beginning of the exercise. The blue dots are final kind of dot voting exercise after there had been a conversation among the committee members. What you will not see in there is the Vision Committee, which actually held their meeting last night after having an opportunity to look at everything that the working groups had done, to hear a presentation of the working group conversation around their dot voting exercise. Everyone did theirs a little bit differently. But the Vision Committee went through theirs. I meant to have those actual boards here for you today, but of course they're up in Aspen and we started off in Garfield County. I just didn't do that math last night after the Vision Committee meeting.
What was the difference between green and blue? I'm sorry.
So we
I'm
did,
confused.
with the working groups, they did 2 dot votes for each continua. One was just walking in the room, having them explain, where are you right now?
The blues after.
They
the
had a conversation, why were they there, and what was the logic, and then there was a final. So you can see in some of them, there's a little bit of shifting and such. For example, in the Vision Committee, there is a pretty robust discussion that moved people, usually from the right, a little bit more to the left. But where the Vision Committee ended up, we had 3 continua. One was on employments and kind of what is the desired level of growth or not for commercial employments, how many people we could serve at the terminal. It generally came out kind of towards the middle of the continua, which was we should anticipate about a 0.8% growth rate, which is pretty close to our initial terminal area forecast, very limited kind of growth model. Using those employment numbers, we'd probably be looking at a terminal that's significantly smaller than what was approved through the EA process and facilities. lot of work to do there, but it kind of put a major stake in the ground in terms of commercial facilities and what was going to be needed to serve them. There's also continua you see on air quality and noise. Generally, where the vision committee ended up after looking at all of the working group continua and discussion was seeking really 20 to 30%, probably closer to 30% reduction in overall emissions, so that we should be designing our infrastructure with those goals. That's inclusive of aircraft, as well as noise, tending towards a 15 to 20% reduction in average daily noise measures, as well as single high noise events. So that was a big step for the groups, and I think as you look through it, what's really interesting is there is a lot of robust discussion, but when people started putting their dots on, there's actually a lot more agreement around the tables than disagreement. We have some boards that I'm not sure are shown in the summary I handed out to you that combine all the dots, so we'll be showing you those as we go through final recommendations. So we have some next steps that we're planning. We're going to be doing a airline panel for August 12th, where we bring airline reps in to start really having the conversation about what their plans are. And then there is a request from the Vision Committee leadership that the Vision Committee really directed us to pursue, and it's doing a symposium or large panel discussion on the future of aviation in a carbon-constrained world, and maybe partnering with the Aspen Institute, but really looking at what are the goals for the industry right now in reducing their carbon footprints? What are the emerging technologies? What is it that we need to be planning for in order to meet that aggressive goal of reducing our overall emissions by that 30%? So we're going to be looking at planning that type of symposium in addition to our regular meeting schedules. So that's kind of where we're at.
So, John, when they're talking about emissions, they're talking about emissions from the built environment, from the airplanes, or?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, and so there's a lot. It would be different strategies. So the built environment, I think, is a clear strategy for us, and we can, I think it's clear how we could shoot close to net zero. And in fact, the grant that we'll be applying for through DOLA will help us do some initial planning and looking at new technologies to help us on the facility side. Then on the aircraft side, that's the major emissions producer at the airport. So there's really a desire for us to look at how do we develop infrastructure that would bring down those emissions. And emissions are inclusive of the greenhouse gases as well as nitrous oxide, volatiles, those sorts of things. So some of that can be accomplished presumably through new aircraft technologies. It maybe is accomplished by building infrastructure on the ground that we don't have now that would allow us to plug in aircraft instead of running APUs to reduce the carbon, the auxiliary power units to reduce the carbon footprint. It could be looking at biofuel options going into the future and what infrastructure we need. That's kind of a closed carbon loop piece. There's lots of options, so we're not there yet, but we think that it's feasible for us to be having that discussion, should be considering.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know there's always been these comments that we should be getting a baseline of our air quality out there. And I don't know how you can do that inclusively without recognizing you've got a moving parking lot out there every morning.
So that is the challenge, George. And actually, we had some requests come in through Woody Creek Caucus, as well as some of the committee members to look at doing air quality monitoring. We're talking with our environmental health department about how we might be able to set that up. The problem is exactly what you described, is we're measuring total emissions. It can be hard to attribute, but not impossible. So we can get some baseline and see how it moves, but we also can, I think, analyze how technologies are anticipated to reduce carbon footprint and emissions going forward. So we're looking at that. That'd be something that'd come back to the board in the future.
Because you can't really speciate in air quality, whether it's diesel or jet fuel.
It's really difficult, yeah.
Kelly?
Yeah, I have two, I guess a comment and a question. Is it something to consider as well that, you know, technology has a big lag, right? So can we be talking about some temporary offsetting to help
Potentially.
goals?
And one of the things that we did with the group is that this is about what your aspirations and interests are, and we've tried to stay away from the discussion about particular solutions until we have a good list of, you know, what is it we're trying to achieve? Which one of these things are in conflict? Where do we have to build compromise? So all of those options for implementation will be on the table, but I think we need to see where the group ends up on their other desired outcomes. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but so we haven't gotten to the solutions piece yet, but it's coming. Yeah, so we're trying to, I used Alice in Wonderland as an example when she's talking to the Cheshire Cat, and she's at a fork in the road, and she says, "Please tell me which way I should go." And the Cheshire Cat says, "Well, where do you want to be?" And she says, "I don't much care." And the Cheshire Cat says, "Well, it doesn't matter which way you go then." Yeah. So we kind of have teed it up
down
as
the rabbit hole,
we're in the phase now of deciding where we want to end up in terms of goals and aspirations in the project. And then we're going to talk about how to get there. So, sorry,
Sure.
that's a
No,
long-winded
okay.
way of saying we're
I
not
just
there
wanna
yet.
make sure I throw that out there for consideration.
But those are on the
And then
the
I
table.
guess I'm noticing, has there been some attrition in some of these groups? Because some of these have like.
Yeah, we are. We're a little concerned about the attendance right now. Some of it, I think, is summertime. Some of it is. We have 120 people. We're probably having around 80 to 90 show up at any given time, and it's kind of rotating.
I guess I'm just looking at some of these individual groups, like the airport experience group
Number of
only has
dots.
6 responses.
Yeah, the dots are.
Yeah, so we had
Any way I can be helpful to, I don't know.
Well, the word on the street
people to
is
stick
still,
with it.
we've made up our minds already, so why are we going to these meetings? I'm still hearing that. And no matter how we blew in the face, say, the Board of County Commissioners has not made any decisions other than these committees, and
We have had good participation generally at the Vision Committee. It was a little bit smaller last night, and I think some of it is summertime is tough.
Sure.
Yeah.
there was that concert last night.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a update. So we're continuing to walk through the visioning process, and we're going to have some new things coming on, and we're probably, in my mind, as I've told our staff, I think we're running probably 30 to 60 days behind where we had anticipated being in these discussions, but we're not going to rush them. So.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, to get back on schedule, we've got board reports, membership reports.
Did you guys, Phyllis, did you have open discussion?
Do you?
You want to add open discussion, or are we?
Okay.
Greg, we have to be out here at 4, so just so
So
you
you've
know.
got an hour, so we want to make sure Phyllis has time. I can put off doing a board membership report, or I can give you a quick one on Rawapa, but that's all I was going to talk about.
I just, real quick,
Well, once you open it up, you might as well do them all.
No, I'm just really quick. There's an issue with Northwest Cog doing a second home or a short-term rental study. I'm in the works talking to community development to see which, because Cindy's been involved in all of them. But it's not, the meeting's not till the end of August, so I have time. I'll bring it back later.
Okay, so these are board membership reports. We're going to blow through them quickly.
Let's just skip
Bring it
them.
back. Should we just skip today? Okay with skipping, or is
And
it
there's no healthy forest collaboration,
burning
John.
need to do? Okay, we'll keep
Whatever
moving
I
and
was
bring
going to
Cindy.
report out can wait till next month.
Okay, I think ours can too. Phyllis, come on up.
John, no healthy forest collaboration.
Did it come off?
It's still on the, no, it's still there.
You're just testing to see if I read it, aren't you?
I don't know why that one's so hard to get.
Okay, so this is our Telecommunications Department update.
Well, and I will introduce everyone. I'm Phyllis Mattice, Deputy County Manager. And with me today is Jeff Kruger in the back, who's trying to figure out the electronics since we're in a new place, so he can get his presentation up. And Michelle McClinton in the back, who's added this, well, I guess it was the end of last year through the budget process, as an administrative support person for the department, which really has turned out to be great when we have major outages like we did at Lower Red. There's actually a human being to answer the phone. When we only had engineers, they were typically out in the field trying to get things working, and citizens were getting frustrated not being able to reach someone. So Michelle has her regular call list folks, and that's what happens when you develop a relationship with folks that are trying to get services, especially TV. That's the one that we hear about a lot. So with that, Jeff, are you close?
I'm close.
Okay.
All right. Action.
Let's keep going,
Okay.
because we,
Other two staff members that are not here are Drew Peterson and Jeff Geltz. Those are two engineers, and they were hoping to be here, but they're busy. Right now, working on, I guess it's decommissioning the old parts of Sunlight. Last year, you'll remember we rebuilt Sunlight, but the snow came too early for us to move and remove the old building. So right now we're in that process of taking equipment that ended up being remained in the old building and getting that moved and trying to clean up some interference that we think is a result. I will say I've learned a lot. Like, I can speak some of those things because I've been doing this for a long time now, whereas when I started I had no clue at all. It's a really technical service that we ended up getting involved with, I think in the 60s when the county was given TV and somehow we got FM. Jeff came to us a little more than 3 years ago. You must be hitting 4 soon.
Almost 4 now.
And having engineers actually on staff, and we brought Drew on as a second engineer on staff, it's really made a big difference on what we've been able to do with rebuilding our sites. When we were outsourcing it and paying an engineer the hourly rate, I think the annual wage we're paying an engineer was equal to about 100 hours of engineer time. So we're much better off having our own engineers in-house. And they work really hard and they work all the time. I see their time in the summer, and they're everywhere. They work on Sundays. They work when they need to be. So they're a really valued resource to the county. And I don't think citizens necessarily know. They just know when things are out and don't realize when people are up and doing things. So, are you ready?
And you're based out of Basalt, correct?
We are now, yes.
no, we're not ready yet on that.
They are in the new location at Southside that we purchased in January. They moved and they became functional, I'm going to say, by March. It's made a big difference in able to have all that space, to be able to have a workspace. Their shop actually has windows. Their prior shop was located in the basement of the jail, which was also located underwater. The water pipes that ran in the jail. So the damage that occurred when we were moving dispatch from the basement in the jail to their current location at the North 40, the telecom department also suffered some damage on half of their shop.
You're live, everyone.
Much better to be above the pipes rather than beneath them.
Well, it looks like this is going to work. Not our normal accommodations that we have. But let me put this in slide mode.
And this presentation was in your packet, so
It's just really hard to read these little tiny dots.
We had multiple pictures.
Oh my goodness, what happened?
They're all
We
like
got
that.
that picture multiple times.
And it made it really hard to read. I tried, though.
So we
Oh.
can't, so this is all new to us, the actual
Okay.
pictures
Well,
and graphs and whatnot.
we were punting last week. I loaded and we lost Charlotte for Friday,
See what
Monday,
happens when we
so
give Charlotte time
we're
off?
gonna, yeah, we still need to keep giving Charlotte time off. We're just gonna have to learn, trial by
After this
something.
weekend, I think she's sticking around for a while.
Okay, it's all yours, Jeff.
Well, let's get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the board for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Jeff Kruger. I'm the Communications Site Manager for Pitkin County. And today we're going to provide a mid-year update to the Telecommunications Department. And by the way, this is a picture of the Williams Tower, which is overlooking Old Snowmass. And this was taken early June when we were doing the broadband install at that site.
Very cool.
So you've got a beautiful view up there of Sopris all the way to Capitol Peak.
And two people are actually
I can see
climbing
'em on
that
the
tower.
tower.
Two people are doing installs on that picture. So the agenda for today, well, I think Phyllis did staff introductions. Maybe I can skip that. But we'll all be talking about our site builds and status, and really the four main areas that we work, which are public safety communications, the TV, FM translator system, the new microwave system, and as well as the Pitkin County Broadband Initiative. But this was our team. I know, like I said, Phyllis did kind of introduce everybody. Both Drew and Jeff Geltz could not be here today because we're just so busy with summer site work. We need to take advantage of the.
He's here. Just came in.
Hi, Jeff.
Well, hey, Jeff, please stand up. And,
Glad you're here. The guy in the purple shirt.
I didn't see you come in. Yeah, Jeff really is instrumental to the county. He maintains all of our equipment, plus he designs and develops a lot of our systems for public safety as well as the microwave system. So he's very valuable to the county. I want to say, though, really before I get going, that I'm really proud of our team. We are a very small department, probably the smallest department in all of Pitkin County, yet we take on and accomplish very large-scale projects. I know there's a lot of talk about big rocks within the county, but our team has been responsible for a number of big rocks over the last few years, including the 911 Dispatch Center, the DTR project, our site builds and infrastructure, the new microwave system, and most recently, the Pitkin County Broadband Initiative. And these are all successful projects that we've delivered. Most of these systems are very complicated, highly technical, and they present lots of challenges. In addition to the development and design work that we do, we also maintain these systems. In particular, we have to maintain a public safety system which operates 24/7, 365 days a year. In many cases, we do work evenings and weekends to keep that system up and running. And so again, I'm just very proud of our team and the accomplishments that we've made. This chart really shows the kind of the scope of what we do and in terms of all of our communication sites. We maintain 14 communication sites throughout the valley, all the way from Sunlight and Glenwood Springs up to Ajax and Aspen. I like showing this chart every year, and for those that are not new or that are new to the board, you probably are just now seeing this. But this really provides you a high-level view of our site infrastructure, to include their site condition as well as the priority for rebuild. In 2015, I believe, we embarked on a campaign to modernize our infrastructure. At that time, this chart was almost all red. And as you can see, it's slowly turning green, but it's our goal in the next 3 or 4 years or so to turn this entire chart green. This year, we plan on doing 2 site builds, which are Jackrabbit and Root Eye. And we plan on following up next year with a rebuild of Thomasville. And then the year after that, Lower Red and Ajax. The one thing to note on this is that we do plan on combining both Lower Red and Upper Red into a single site, and then decommissioning Lower Red. And we want to move everything to Lower Red because we have grid power there. The Upper Red site is solar only, and it works fine for FM translator equipment today, but it cannot support the additional TV translator equipment as well as KSPN and other services. And really the highlighted item here, and I know all of you are aware of it, is that the Lower Red Mountain site has failed. And I'll get into that next. I hate to report bad news, but the Lower Red Comm site did fail last month. This was reported to the board last month. It's been in the papers. It failed because of a power line failure going up the hill. The power line itself is 40 years old. It was buried in a trench without any conduit, and there's no protective sheathing on it. And it is now exposed in many areas. And you can see the picture over here on the right of the actual power cable where it is exposed. It was required to be buried in a trench by Forest Service. And just over the years, with all the forest growth and everything else, it has kind of popped up in a couple of places. We had an electrical contractor come out and do a continuity and resistivity test. They found multiple shorts on the line. And they're also telling us there's a code violation on the line, and even if we were to repair the shorts, that we couldn't reconnect it anyway. So we have no other option but to replace the line. Lower Red is also very complicated. It's probably our most complicated site in terms of ownership, management, and maintenance. It's on Forest Service land. Yet there are separate permits for American Tower, Pitkin County, as well as KSPN. So there's no clear maintenance or management scheme, and it's our goal over the next 2 years to really fix that and come up with a unified plan. The site today serves 3 main purposes. It provides TV translator transmission. It's also the main transmission site for grassroots TV and county government TV. So both of those channels are down countywide, whereas the other TV channels at other sites are not affected. It also provides the Aspen Ski Company Power of 4 webcam. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that. That is down right now. And it was the main transmitter site for KSPN. They had a 3,000 watt transmitter site out of that location. Within really a few days of the power failure, we worked with KSPN to relocate them. We put them over at Jackrabbit, which is in Old Snowmass, in Snowmass Village. And that has actually a good sight view into Aspen. So we were able to get KSPN up and running. That was not under any obligation by county, but we did that just as a kind of a public outreach to help them out. We donated some equipment, we donated a transmitter, they donated an antenna, and we got the system up and running. So it's not only providing service in Aspen, it's providing service all the way down valley as well.
I will say that there's a 1980 joint use agreement with KSPN that was kind of interesting. That said it's the county's, the electric service is the county's responsibility. And that was, so that's kind of why we took it on. It didn't say we needed to relocate it. It said we have no responsibility if anything fails, but yet the electric line is stated in that 1980, so we're talking 39 years ago, agreement. That's still on file, that's how that came about, that we're the responsible party for the electric. We're not the responsible party for the building or for their antenna, which fell, couple of years ago now. So, but that's understanding why the electric services are responsible.
So are we looking at revisiting that? I mean, we don't have those agreements with any other stations, do we?
No, only on that one site.
So it seems like it's an opportunity now to revisit that contract and change that wording, so Pitkin County is not responsible for a radio station.
Well, it needs the site's going to need to be rebuilt. So with that, will give us the opportunity to negotiate who's responsible for what, who needs to build the building, the electric, towers. So,
Excuse
yeah.
me, but wasn't there something in here about consolidating those sites into one? Or didn't I see that, or is that?
Upper to lower.
Upper to lower, so lower's gotta come back on regardless. Okay, thanks.
Where are we in the process with the permitting from Pitkin County? Remember the call I got that said the Board of County Commissioners had stopped any progress, and I questioned that?
Yeah, there's been no decision. That was not how it was, how the phone call was conducted, but that's how it was heard. Message given was not message received, is all I can say.
The message I got.
But it can't be repaired right now, and it's really under Forest Service. We've contacted them. If we needed to just fix the line, we would be able to fix the line under our Forest Service permit. To replace the line needs Forest Service permitting. So we're
You
going to have to
mentioned
go
to me
through
you'd
that.
gone to community development about the permit process. Was that related to Lower Red?
That's related to Root Eye.
Okay, I knew there was one that we
have a lot going on.
I just knew that there was an obstacle, but it was a matter of public safety, so we needed to get that Route I-1, that permit pushed.
And we understand that's actually moving forward.
Thanks, Phyllis. Let me continue. So, also the TV translators that we're running at Lower Red, we plan to relocate to Jackrabbit, but we can't do this until after the site build. The reason for that is that the TV panel antennas are very heavy, and the current Jackrabbit site towers are overloaded. So we can't install that equipment there now as a temporary fix. But we will install it once the site is rebuilt, and I have a couple charts showing this, but the plan is to have that complete in September. Unfortunately, there is no option to move the Aspen Ski Co. Power of 4 webcam. We are getting quotes to replace the line. There's two options. One is to do another buried cable, but this time as an armored cable, so it's kind of impervious to rodents and other varmints. Also, the other option would be to actually run conduit, bore conduit up the hill, and then just run regular cable through the conduit. So we're looking at both options right now.
What's the distance in that, Jeff, that you have to?
It's about 2,000 feet.
Okay. And you would still need Forest Service permit to do that?
And yes, we do, in fact. That's a good point. We do need Forest Service approval to do that work.
And
As well as that line also passes through two properties in Starwood that we have an easement with. So that'll.
So you're getting ready to go out for bids on the line, but at the same time, you're going through the process of trying to obtain a Forest Service permit and talking to the two private landowners for easement access?
Correct.
Can I ask what the difference in cost is for the conduit versus just a line? Because if the line in the conduit fails, you can replace it so much easier, correct? Is that the?
Yes, that's an advantage of going with conduit.
Yeah, but it's probably significantly.
It's going to be more expensive, yes.
Right. Kelly?
How many TV users are affected by the CGTV and grassroots outage?
Well, we don't have an exact number for City of Aspen. It's really revolves around people calling in complaining.
I know.
We certainly have had calls complaining, but we don't have an exact number of how many people actually use the system.
Yeah. But it's throughout the entire county, not just the city of Aspen, so all the way up to Redstone. You know,
Right.
Unless you have cable TV, but this is just
not up in Redstone.
Satellite TV.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So this next chart shows some pictures of Lower Red, and it really emphasizes the poor site condition. not only did we have a power failure, but we also had a tower failure 2 years ago in 2017. You may recall, but this was in January in the winter. The tower fell, again, because there is really no site maintenance or management plan. The tower is still sitting up there. It's been disassembled and it's in 10-foot sections, but it's still sitting up there by the side of the building. The building itself is over 50 years old. It's in really poor condition. The interior of the structure is also in very poor condition, and it's all operating with very old translator gear, which is well beyond end of life.
Yes. Past its expiration date.
Past its expiration
much.
date, absolutely. So I want to talk about two of the site rebuilds that we're doing this summer. One is Jackrabbit, which again serves Snowmass Village. It historically has only provided TV, FM translator services, but in the future it's going to provide not only TV, FM translator, but broadband as well as public safety. And because of the public safety aspect, we're going to put a generator in the building, so at least from this point forward, be able to operate when there is grid power failure. Right now, the build status is we completed the P&Z review. We're in the final stages of getting our permit, and we hope to start construction actually in the next week or two.
Jeff, just a quick question regarding what would it take to put a solar and battery backup system on there? Is that even feasible? Is the power load on that too great for a solar farm?
It would take up a lot of real estate for the solar panels in order to power it. We have, high power equipment in these shelters, and it's one thing, like I said, at Upper Red site, when all we're doing is operating a handful of FM translators, but when you start adding all these other services like public safety, microwave, broadband, it really gets to be too many panels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know.
And
just what the load
surprisingly,
is.
the Forest Service, for whatever reason, has been opposed to us putting solar panels at our sites. We tried to put them at Elephant, and they opposed it, mainly because of the footprint. They didn't like the footprint of the solar panels up at our mountaintop site.
You're talking 7 kilowatts or 10 kilowatts or something like that, a big array.
Yes.
Just guessing. Okay. More than a typical house.
Yes.
Okay.
By far.
So, Jeff, Jackrabbit, as you show on the chart, it will, once completed, it will provide broadband, TV, FM, and public safety. You already have KSPN over there, correct? So back to our previous slide in terms of Lower Red with the issue with CG 11 Grassroots 12. Is that sort of a temporary, or why wouldn't we just move that equipment once Jackrabbit's rebuilt? You just move that over to Jackrabbit?
And as a permanent solution?
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, that may end up being the case if we can't get things resolved with Lower Red. Right now, it's a temporary solution. We're under the assumption that we are going to be able to rebuild Lower Red. So right now, it's a temporary solution to keep things going. But it could very well turn into a permanent solution. One of the problems, and you'll see this on the next slide, is the picture on the right is a view towards Aspen from Jackrabbit. So you've got really good views into Aspen with the exception of East Aspen, and that's hidden by this hill right over here. So although you're going to hit probably 75-80% of Aspen, you're missing that east end section. So it doesn't really become a permanent solution because of that. And actually, the picture on our left shows our site plan. The building and towers are shown at the very top. We plan to build a new structure as well, two 40-foot towers just to the south of the existing structure. The other site we plan to do this summer is Rudai. Rudai sits right above the Rudai Reservoir. It's a critical site for public safety. It'll provide two-way radio communications for law enforcement, fire protection, as well as first responders. Right now, we have a gap of service within the Frying Pan River Valley, and this is going to fill that gap. The site includes an 80-foot tower as well as 2 shelters, one for equipment and one for the generator. It's currently pending Forest Service approval, but it is in final review. And we are hoping to start work end of August or early September. This is some pictures of the Rudai site. The site was actually an old TV translator site that was abandoned about 15 to 20 years ago. The structure is still up there, the one on the left, and this is where we're going to place the new shelter and tower. The one on the right was actually found during a site walkthrough. We didn't even know it existed. And maybe it's got some historical purpose, but the Forest Service has said that we have to tear it down as part of the approval.
It's back from the days of black and white.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, this goes back to the 60s, 50s or 60s, we believe.
And
Can we recycle the
view that,
barnwood? Can we recycle the barnwood?
You could make a tiny house.
you might.
But, I don't want it to go to, I'd rather find a way to recycle it.
It's pretty sketchy wood. It's
Well, but there's a
been
lot of
weathered.
people in this valley that make things
Yeah.
out of sketchy wood.
Well, we'll make a note of that. It's a good,
It's
it's a good suggestion.
Come and get it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That makes it even better.
The view, one thing that's good about us that we're not using the old site, which is at a Vista location, which you see there looking at the Rudai, is just incredible. And when the Forest Service came out, they said there's probably some cultural significance to that view site. And the site we're building, the one to the left, so the foreground is where we're going to be building, was a much better location because the cultural would have been some hurdles to get over. And so they're really happy we're tearing it all down. Although at one point they said, is it historic because it's from 1960 and should we leave it there? And I think it was...
If you were in the city of Aspen, you would have to.
Yeah. But I think the Forest Service would prefer that it goes back to its natural state.
Yeah.
Yeah, great
So
view.
what you're looking at there at the old and future site, that's looking down the Frying Pan, which is pretty incredible that you can see sunlight from that location looking that way. I was kind of surprised. I was off on how it was oriented.
The view toward Rudai is looking west? Is that what we're doing?
This
No,
is looking
that one
towards
over there.
The
Hagerman
other one,
Pass.
the other one. Yeah, that's looking toward.
Yeah, the
Hagerman.
first one is,
Yeah, thank you. I was thought, wait a minute.
yeah,
Right,
the first
thanks.
one's looking to Frying Pan, the other one's toward Hagerman.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, Thomasville is would be up valley on this picture, the one on the right.
Oh, right. So you can see sunlight from that point. I can see it there, yeah.
And so you can just see, based on that picture, how this site is just so critical for public safety. And let's see, next I'm going to kind of go into really the 4 main areas we work. First being public safety communications. We designed and developed the DTR system, which included 4 new sites, as well as an 800 megahertz radio system that's integrated now with the state radio system. It provides, again, coverage for our two-way radio communications for law enforcement, fire protection, first responders. We have over 1,200 radio units on the system to date. Wow. It's been very successful, but we have identified 2 gap areas, one being the Frying Pan River Valley, which Rudai is going to solve after the build. The second one is the Basalt High School. So we don't have good coverage within the high school. So what we're doing is adding a distributed amplifier within the school such that law enforcement, fire can have active responder communications if any situation were to arise. So once we have those 2 gap areas filled, everything will be covered within our valley. One of the other things we did this past winter is the Grand Traverse Race Organization wanted to add a radio and antenna at our Ajax site in order to improve communications. The Grand Traverse, many of you probably know, is a cross-country ski event which goes from Crested Butte to Aspen. In the past, there have been no communications during that event, cell phone, radio, or otherwise. And so we eagerly accommodated their request and installed a radio and antenna at the Ajax site. We donated some equipment that we had left over from a site build last summer, and we're able to get them up and running prior to that event. This is actually a permanent install, and it will not only be used for the Grand Traverse, but it's going to be used for the mountain bike and run races that they do in the summer.
What frequency does the VHF work on up there? Do you know?
Well, this one is 450 megahertz, I believe.
And that's at the top of Buckhorn. Top of Buckhorn Ski Trail, is that where that tower is? Yeah.
The top of the mountain to the right.
The other area we work is TV FM translator services. We were just talking about Lower Red and the failure there of TV FM. You know, one of the things is all the snow we had this year was great for the ski industry, but not so great for maintaining mountaintop communication sites. So we had a number of failures this past winter. One was actually a transmission line going up to Sunlight, which had some water damage, and we were getting some freeze-thaw cycle on it. We were able to actually move it over to our old translator site because that's still in place. We also lost an antenna up at Crown Mountain, and the site was down there as well for a few days. We are improving the system. We've now replaced both translators and antennas at 3 of our 8 sites, and we can now remotely manage and monitor these sites from our office in Basalt. So it's made a huge difference in terms of our maintenance, but we still have a ways to go in order to get all the sites updated and completed. This picture really shows in March the Crown Tower. The other thing going on with TV Translator is when we lost Dish Network, we were able to replace all the channels from Grand Junction with the exception of NBC. NBC operates at a low power transmitter. We can't pick it up at Sunlight, but we are looking at alternatives, and one is to bring NBC from Denver, which is Channel 9 News, and stream it over the internet and then put it onto our broadband system and then disperse it throughout the valley. So we're actually approached them about this. They're actually very eager and excited about getting their TV channel up into our valley, and so they've been very helpful in the process. We purchased some equipment to do an evaluation and test, and we're hoping that it's successful and we can get 9 News Denver NBC affiliate up here in the fall.
This question, do we run the risk of being accused of playing favorites when we choose 9 versus 7 or 6 or anybody else? Is there an issue there? No problems with that?
We would take any of the Denver channels. I mean, when we did a survey, I think it was maybe 5 years ago, the citizens that responded wanted Denver channels over Grand Junction, mostly because they feel it's more current.
Big city.
Big city, yeah, it's a big city news. Mm-hmm. So because NBC is the only network that we cannot get over the air at Sunlight from Grand Junction because of how they transmit. So there's no others. I mean, I think we would negotiate if somebody came to us. We've never had a TV station come to us and say, we want to be on your translator system. Wow. Versus radio stations are regularly coming to us because that adds their market share for the most part for advertising and all of that. Right. On radio, TV, interesting. Not as much of a concern. And we don't have a lot of people watching TV over the air. Although the more broadband can get people into the Hulu type reception, If they want to get local TV, then going over the air is a great way to get your local TV that way, and then use broadband for your other TV.
Interesting.
So we'll see where this all ends up.
Okay, thanks.
So the next thing, next item that we really do and focus on is the microwave system. We installed a brand new microwave system. We did the design about 2 years ago, completed the installation last summer. The system has been fully operational since last September. It's had 100% uptime. And that's not to say that we haven't had failures. We have had failures, but the way the system is designed is we continue to operate. We have a main primary loop. If a link fails, we can continue to operate going around the other side. Also, we have multiple radios. Not to get into too much technical detail, we have multiple radios that connect two sites together so that if we lose a radio, we're still operational but degraded. The picture on the bottom right shows our microwave system for phase 1. It includes 10 new hops with 10 sites total. It's a high bandwidth system. The other pictures really show some of our installation. One being at the top of Loge on the left, North 40, which is the new dispatch center in the middle. The upper right was the installation at Sunlight on the 120-foot tower. Our staff does all the installation. We maintain, manage, and monitor operation of the microwave system. We're now in the process of expanding the microwave system. It's been highly successful. We're calling this Phase 2 microwave expansion. I think Drew, when we were drawing this out, said it looks like a snowman. So we are internally calling this Project Yeti. And, but it includes an additional secondary loop, which goes through Sunlight. It also includes redundant paths to Jackrabbit and the town of Snowmass, as well as links going out to Route I and Thomasville. It's been funded partially by DOLA grants, so all the DOLA grant work that really Kara has been doing is responsible for is coming back and is helping accelerate the schedule. Another thing that we completed this year was the Basalt Meet Me Center. And I don't know, many of you may be asking, what's a Meet Me Center? But a Meet Me Center is really, it's an off-ramp for the information superhighway. It's a fiber aggregation point and a microwave aggregation point whereby anchors institutions, government entities, and ISPs can all come and buy bandwidth. And the idea is to get the cost down. And we're seeing that right now through our Phase 1 broadband system and Project Thor. But this was actually built in the old Basalt office on Emma Road. So when Mountain Family Health was redoing their facility, we decided to carve out a small space and build a Meet Me Center. And I'm actually glad we had the foresight to build it. We never thought it'd be used for the next maybe 3 to 5 years, but we are having some technical challenges with the Pitkin Garfield Authority, and that now has prompted us to potentially use this site this year. So I'm glad we built it, and it was a very good thing for the broadband initiative.
One thing I will add, you'll see the landfill is one of the little boxes up there. The landfill prior to our project had 2 T1 lines going to the landfill. So if they were on the computer, sometimes they couldn't, their phones were IP2. They couldn't use their phone and their computers at the same time, or they couldn't send emails, or they couldn't they would get a traffic jam on their 2 T1 lines, which is really low bandwidth availability. So they are now on our microwave system, and they can talk and compute at the same time now. And that happened last year?
Yeah, the end of last year.
So that was a big benefit. They were actually one of our first customers then of our system. So the microwave system not only is going to be good for our broadband, but it carries Pitkin County network on that microwave system. So the landfill's tied into the county network via this.
And the Basalt Meet Me Center is going to provide, like I said, that secondary fiber into the system. Right now, we have a single point of failure, and that is a single fiber line coming into the North 40 Dispatch Center. This will provide some redundancy and some resiliency. We also plan to add a microwave link from the Emma Road building over to our Crown site. All right, so let's talk broadband. I'm going to wrap it up with some of our broadband work. I think early on I showed a red flag. I'm happy to say that with the broadband initiative, this is a green flag, or maybe I should have put in a checkered flag. But we did complete phase 1 of the Pitkin County Broadband Initiative and are now fully active as of July 1st of this year. We completed all the installs in June and May. And this was really a long road. I think we started out with a phase 1 and 2 study roughly 4 years ago. We then proceeded to put out an RFP, and we selected a network operator, and that was awarded to Mammoth Networks. And then we proceeded to do a phase 1 design and install. So this is now the result of that phase 1 install completion. Services are offered in 3 areas. There's a Mid-Valley location, which serves Basalt Willits, and that's served from Crown Mountain. There's an Upper Mid-Valley location, which serves Old Snowmass and Woody Creek, and that's served from the Williams location. And then we serve the Crystal River Valley through the Elephant location. The network operator then, in turn, has selected 2 ISPs to provide services to the public. Those 2 ISPs include Visionary Broadband and Pathfinder. And for people watching and listening today, we encourage you to call one of those 2 ISPs to first of all see if service is available in your area, and then to get pricing details and plan details as well. Our broadband goals and objectives have really been consistent from the start. We set out to design an open access middle mile network. We've achieved that goal. We also set out that the system has to be affordable and abundant. That is, no one will pay more than $70 a month for standard FCC service, which is 25 down, 3 up. Also, we wanted it to be redundant and resilient. We're working on the redundant piece, but we are going to have that solved here shortly. We are offering 3 priorities of service, one being the standard FCC service, which is 25 down, 3 up, but we're also offering a lower tier, which is 10 down, 1 up, and a higher tier, which is 40 down, 5 up. And these are some pictures of the broadband installs at Williams, Elephant, and Crown. We had tower crews on each one of these sites. You can see a close-up to the right on Crown, which really shows the broadband access panels and how many of them there are in order to provide that full coverage. And that concludes the presentation today. Again, I want to thank the board for the opportunity to speak here today, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Questions?
I'll make a comment.
Comments?
Yeah, I just really wanted to thank and acknowledge Jeff and Drew and your staff. You know, when we look in terms of how far we've come in the last 3-4 years, it's because we actually not only have great staff, but we actually have a department. And all these issues that you've had to deal with is due to the deferred maintenance that it's sort of been a forgotten part of Pitkin County for 30, 40 years. So you guys are doing a great job, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, George.
Steve?
I was wondering how it's working for you being on Southside Drive in Basalt, for your headquarters.
Great spot.
Well, I guess that's another big thank you to the board. It's been a big advantage to us to be mid-valley, because like I said, our sites span between Glenwood Springs and Aspen, up the Frying Pan, up the Crystal River Valley. It's just it's a great central location for us to get to sites and respond to problems faster. So yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. You guys do a great job, thank you.
I just remember back in the early 90s when a company I worked with brought in a T1 line, and that was like the holy grail. Like to have a T1
right.
line, a single T1 line was like, wow, we are so fast.
So fast.
And now it's not, it doesn't do,
It's like you have a what?
yeah, it's like, so I'm just wondering how long before 25 down and 3 up isn't enough?
Tomorrow.
Like, yeah, how are the standards, are we going to be able to, you've got 40 and 5, I see.
Yes.
Just thinking, how future-proof are we?
Well, I think what you're probably going to see in this space is more and more people going to fiber. And that's really the long-term evolution of this process. We're not going to get rid of wireless because there's still going to be groups and homes that are, you're not going to have that return on investment for someone to run fiber to their home. But I think that's kind of the progression that we're seeing, is that, you're going to start seeing more and more fiber, even the rural areas.
And especially as you start seeing the rural electric companies picking up and participating in fiber. They have the poles. They're not necessarily engineered. They have a big investment, but I think that's going to be, that they're going to be filling in a lot more gaps. But yeah, the wireless, I think it's filling a gap right now, and I think it'll continue to fill more gaps. If fiber gets further out, then you start your wireless at a further out point, which means maybe we'll get to some more of those distant homes with a fixed wireless solution. But it's going to be interesting. I don't know how long all this will be. I mean, people asked us, what's going to happen to FM and TV? Why are we investing in FM TV at this point? Because we've been installing all new equipment because they were all at end of life and kind of forgotten about, and paper clips and duct tape were doing a great job keeping them running. But why are we investing in it? But the equipment has a life of about 8 years, so it'll be interesting to see what are we doing in 8 years with those kind of services. Are we going to be continuing? Is it all going to be internet? Is it? I don't know. I'll tell you, radio people will tell you there will always be radio. When you go to a construction site, what do you hear? You hear the radios on, and it's not usually satellite radio. It's usually local.
Radio, right.
So
good point.
it'll be interesting. I don't know.
I know we're about out of time. The last question I wanted to ask is just regarding some of these areas that haven't been hit yet. And I know we were looking for sites. I know the providers were looking for locations for an LTE, I guess is the tower that would be placed up, East Aspen being one spot or somewhere up in a valley. I'm just wondering how portable, do you have a portable rig you can go to measure signal power, signal strength, things like that in various parts of the valley, so you know where the shadows or where the weak spots are?
Yes, we can. In fact, the ISPs have that equipment.
They've got that. You don't have that in your...
We don't have it, but the ISPs do.
You don't have to bother with it.
And so the ISPs, once they get a call, if, the coverage map that we provided before, it's hard to see here, but this is the coverage map for the 3 sites. And so this is kind of what this is what they first look at. But if there's a home that's kind of on the border, they'll actually go out to visit the house and do a signal test.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So I have a question. I don't know what the progress is at either state or federal level about some kind of incentive or requirement even for using Holy Cross or whatever power lines for service. This is more on the broad. I've had a constituent at the grocery store lecture me on why Pitkin County isn't making more effort to require all the governors across the country to pass a law in their state that makes it mandatory to use those lines for service. Have we heard anything more?
Well, they're not using the electric lines. What they're using is the pathways. And Colorado did have legislation in the last election to allow the rights-of-way.
Right, that's what I meant, using, without having to go through individual right-of-ways.
Without having to develop and perfect each right-of-way as you
Right.
go along. Because as that was happening prior to this legislation, I mean, one property owner leaving a gap means it's not happening.
Happened in
You
Kremling.
can't run it. So we do have that, but still, some of the towers, there has to be so much separation between the power line and the fiber line. And if you go on, I don't know, you probably know, the back way from Carbondale to Glenwood, on the west side, if you look up, you'll see fiber running on the power line cable, so you can see where the paths are. I don't remember which provider
So
it
the
is.
state legislation did pass, allowing them to do that, not requiring them.
It didn't include all providers. So Tri-State, for example, was excluded, and they have huge coverage in the state. So you
The
would
rural
still need to
electrics-
go.
The rural electric associations,
But Tri-State, who is a large provider and really intersects the whole state, is not covered on that.
did they lobby to be not covered as part of that? Probably.
Don't know.
Probably. So it's provided for, allowed, but not, he was asking that this be required, and I said, I don't think that's going to happen, and we don't have power over all the governors across the country, nor do we have power over Congress as a whole to make it a national.
We will say that our local provider, Holy Cross, is showing some interest in the future
I'll
of
pass that
developing it.
on.
And they're researching, where, like getting to Marble. There's power going to Marble, which we've always included in our project because they're on this side of the valley and they're not going to get service from the rest of Gunnison County. But some of the poles are 30, 40 years old. It's
There'll be a
huge
lot of
investment,
improvement in infrastructure,
so
like going to Ruby.
how do you evaluate it?
Yeah.
So,
But we do think long-term, that may be a transition opportunity as our microwave,
To some of our,
yeah, that
I know
we'll
the east of
probably see
Aspen
more
is
of that
so
fiber
desperate.
moving out with the utilities, and they may be a natural partner in a future authority that we
I'll
create.
pass that on, because those few folks up in Aspen in east of Aspen who don't have the deep pockets to be able to find a way are really concerned about getting service.
well, Holy Cross has recruited folks from Glenwood Springs who are running the broadband service in Glenwood Springs. So we know they have folks on staff now that have background. The Mountain Connect conference that I attended had two Holy Cross staff members who
Holy
attended
Cross is
it.
looking at other options in
So-
their revenue portfolio, so, great, I'll pass that on to Kevin.
Delta has certainly, the Delta Montrose Electric actually created a subsidiary to provide broadband. I
But
think
did they have issues with easements right away?
They did.
Yeah, but
But
we
I
knew
think
that
they-
was really stalling this,
Yeah.
but now that the state is looking at addressing that is great. Thank you.
So it's all slowly. I can't believe how long I've been working on this. I think 5 years, because if Jeff's been here 4, I know I was working to get somebody hired that knew how to do this then.
We appreciate that, Jeff, we
so-
appreciate your efforts.
It's taken a while, and they've done incredible work, from designing the plan to building it. They're a full service that we have right in our own little department.
Well, thank you. Yeah, our thanks to you've got a hardworking team, and you just demonstrated how important you are, how much you've accomplished, and how you're working around the clock to make it work. And I think we appreciate that. We can say that.
Well, I really appreciate it.
Good
Thank you.
presentation, too. I know a lot more than I did earlier, so.
Okay, well, good.
Thanks a lot. I think we're done. We're out. Grassroots,
Thank you,
thank you.
Grassroots.
Thank you.
Oh, look at, he sounded asleep.
We're finished.